Please like and subscribe. What was I just saying? Something about Gary and his scary movies? Oh man, those were the good old days. Do you ever miss the good old days? I do. Not to say that the days we're in now are bad, just that they're not as good, you know? I mean, do you remember the good old days? I barely can. I mean, adult life has a way of wiping your mental hard drive and taking that space where you kept the good old days of youth, you know, the childhood innocence, watching scary movies with your friends, friendship in general, really, and replacing it with adult knowledge like tax records and how to work at the post office. I'm burdened by knowledge. I'm also burdened by burdens. For one, I work at the post office. You know, it's the worst job that I've ever worked, personally. But every job is the worst when you're working it. You know, the worst part of your day is usually going to work, which usually makes the place where you make your living the worst part of your life. My whole life is working at the post office. I do not have time for anything else. No wife, no friends. I never even see my old buddy Gary anymore. No time. It's that simple. But it's also complex in that his dad, who just got out of prison, hates my guts. He thinks I'm a bad influence on his son, and that I'm a deadbeat loser who works at the post office. And of course he's right. But it's not that simple, you know? I'm Gary's first friend. I am supposed to be a bad influence. That's my duty. You know how it is with your first friend? You know, the first person you ever meet is usually the worst alcoholic you ever meet. That's their duty. I don't know why it is, but it is. Perhaps it is because the person you first experience friendship with is there to teach you through first-hand experience, and perhaps initiate one or two of the worst experiences of your life in the process. The first is the worst, they say. And if your first friend isn't the worst alcoholic you ever met, get help, my friend, because that means you are your first friend's first friend. The last person they could rely on, and the first person to ask for their help. I had to ask Gary for help recently, and that was horrible. You know, it was the first time I'd seen him in months. I see more of Mike Mixon, honestly. His house is on my route, and I see a lot more of his mom, Mayor Mixon. And Mayor Mixon, ooh-wee. Do I need help with her? You know, there's a story. I was delivering the mail to Mayor Mixon's house last October. Now, I am not a spectacular mailman, but that's okay. Because mailmen aren't supposed to be spectacular. They're not even supposed to be okay, really. But I try, which makes me spectacular as relative to other mailmen. When I first took this job, I had this image in my head that I'd be the jolly old postman, you know, bringing mail with a smile, waving to the milkman while he's dropping off his big-ass glass bottles whenever we inevitably crossed paths. None of that exists anymore. There's no milkmen. There's nothing made out of glass. Both bottles and milk are now 50% petroleum and 50% growth hormone 12. And that's why everywhere you look, you see these fucking 12-year-olds growing their big-ass titties. That's probably why we don't even have milkmen anymore. No one wants some milkman peddling vitamin D to the door where their kids keep their double Ds. In a few years, we won't even have mailmen anymore. You know, I haven't delivered a letter in 2 years. Just mail. Endless mail. Half the buildings I deliver mail to are abandoned. The rest of the time, I'm dropping off eviction notices to my former classmates and collecting the chain mail which they're sending to defraud their elderly neighbors. But when I'm handing those poor old people their mail, if they should happen to say hello to me, I try to give them a little smile back. I try, which again makes me spectacular as compared to other mailmen. If they want it, I even give them a little back and forth. You know, how's it hanging? Slightly to the left? Ha ha ha! I try to make them laugh if they want it. Old Mayor Mixon, she wants it. Listen to me, old. I mean, she's not old. She's old for me, but she looks, you know, very young for a woman who has a son who I know by name. She looks great, honestly. She has that very cold Nordic beauty where she's, you know, so visibly uptight that her skin literally stays up and tight. She's going a little gray, but she's very blonde, so instead of looking like, you know, an old woman, she looks like a child playing an old woman in a school play. It's like who put talcum powder in little Susie's hair? The only reason you know she's not a 12-year-old of the modern era is that she doesn't have double Ds. But a couple Saturdays back, I brought Mayor Mixon some chainmail, and she came out to grab it. It was the first time I'd seen her face not on one of those stupid signs she had all over town. You know, I was surprised by how much younger she looked in person, and she gave me this look like she knew I was thinking about the way she looked. I didn't want us just looking at each other in silence, so I said, "Hey there, you're not Mayor Mixon, are you?" Mayor Mixon said, "Hey, you're not a psychic, are you?" And I immediately felt stupid because I realized she was standing next to a big stupid sign of her face that said, "Vote for Mayor Mixon." I gave a nervous laugh and said, I only meant I know your son, Mike. She smiled. Now how's a dashing young man like yourself know my boy? Then I realized that Mike Mixon may well have told his mother about the time I watched Gary beat him to a pulp. So, hoping not to have further trouble with the mayor's office, I quickly dropped the subject. I pivoted back to her psychic comment and put her junk mail to my head like Karnak. I said, I'm sensing your boy has been pre-approved for a new line of credit. And Mayor Mixon started cracking up at that. Like, really cracking up. She had this real cackle that could crack glass. At least it could if the glass in America wasn't 50% petroleum. Mayor Mixon said, do you really think you can tell? I said, tell what? What's in the mail? No, I mean, yes, but only because my entire job is dropping off eviction notices to my former classmates and collecting the chain mail which they're sending to defraud their elderly neighbors. Not that you're elderly. Also, the pink slips are pink, so it's not that either. And I already said that to you, but it was a new joke to her, so again, she cackled. If I had been attracted to her at all, I wasn't after I heard that cackle. I love to laugh. Humor is probably the most important thing to me in any relationship. It's how I get comfortable with someone. It's how I deal with uncomfortable situations. In fact, it was how I was dealing with the mayor. I told a little joke, which was unfortunate because she wouldn't let go of that first stupid joke I told. She said, no, really, Mr. Psychic, do you believe that you can tell something is about to happen before it happens? And it just so happened that each time she said happened, she happened to take a step closer to me. And with each step she took, she happened to puff out her chest a little bit so that my eye line was drawn to her neckline. I said, I don't know, anything's possible. You know, Johnny Carson seemed to make it happen every time he put on a turban. Little joke, little bit of back and forth. I don't even think she heard a little bit of what I said. She went right into her cackle, and when she stopped cackling, she said to me, that happens to me all the time. I always know when something's about to happen with someone who's about to become important to me. Do you believe in that sort of thing? I said, do I believe in magical happenings and premonitions? I don't want to say no. I feel like that makes me sound boring. And actually, I had a friend once who had that happen to him. My old buddy Gary. He was at the mall once with his dad, and there was this guy who started walking a few steps behind him. And Gary just got this feeling. It was this feeling that was barely even a feeling. It was like a voice, which he heard 2 inches behind his ears, saying, this guy who's behind me is going to kill someone. And if I don't get away, it's going to be me. So he ran away to Brookstone and he hid in the massage chair all day. Then, later, someone killed his mom. Car accident. He never knew if it was the guy, but he always had this feeling that it was. Mayor Mixon said, wow, because I said all that really fast. I'd taken a little bit of speed that day, trying to speed through the day. Mayor Mixon said, wow, because my uncomfortable story had made the situation uncomfortable. So, as a force of habit, I told a little joke. I pointed to my mail truck and said, well, I better go play in traffic. They tell you not to as a kid, but as an adult, it's all they expect you to do. Mayor Mixon gave another big laugh and screamed, that is so true. That's all they tell you to do. I keep telling the girls in my office to play in traffic all day, like the little teenage girls who intern at my office. One of these days, they're going to end up like your friend's mom. I gave her an awkward laugh back, but it wouldn't have mattered if I hadn't. She couldn't hear me. I could hear nothing but her cackling for my whole drive home. Even after I got home, her manic laughter seemed to hang stuck in that space 2 inches behind my ears. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with the mayor again all week, because she was at the mayor's office. But her laughter rolled around my head all the way till Saturday. And when it was Saturday and I pulled up to Mayor Mixon's house, she rolled out onto her front yard in a bathrobe. Before I even so much as opened my mouth to say hi, she started in laughing again, perhaps this time feeling some embarrassment at her thinly veiled attempt to show off her thinly veiled body. I personally felt a lot of embarrassment, so I said, hey there, Mayor Giggles. Somebody tell you a joke or something? Who do I gotta be jealous of? And I wish I hadn't have said that, but it was automatic for me. Whenever I'm so uncomfortable that it hurts, words spurt out, and I flirt. That's me. And when I said, who do I gotta be jealous of? I could see the wheels spin in her head like it was a beautiful mind and she was solving the equation about what I must have meant. Her pale face flushed hot red, even though it was an October freeze and she was standing outside in nothing but her nightie, which incidentally was also bright red. The mayor said, I'm the one who ought to be jealous. You've got a secret admirer. And she handed me a huge envelope that said, "From the mayor to the mailman." And amidst her cackling, she said, "Do you get it?" And I said, "Get what?" And she stopped cackling and grew deadly serious. She said, "It's like your joke from before." And I laughed and said, "Oh yeah," even though I was thinking to myself, "Oh no." You know how sometimes you'll have a friend that just insists on an inside joke and you can't escape it? It's like a really ugly piece of furniture that's inside your living room. You always have to kind of just step around it. And it's like, damn, I wish I could get rid of that couch. But my friends will insist on something comfortable to rest on. The mayor was resting on that nothing joke from before. So I held the envelope to my head and said, "I'm sensing it's an envelope." This time, no laugh, not even a smile. She just gave me very high-frequency eye contact and explained, No. Your other joke about how you hadn't delivered anyone a letter in 2 years. I guess I had also repeated that joke to her. I didn't even remember doing it, but clearly it left an impression. She said, "Now you've delivered a letter." I said, "Thank you, Mayor." She said, "Read it?" And I didn't say, "You can't expect me to read it right here in front of you," because that was clearly what she expected. As a sane person, however, I could have never expected what came out of the massive envelope. It was not a letter at all. It was one of those massive signs with her stupid face on it, which said, "Vote for Mayor Mixon." But the words "Vote for Mayor Mixon" had been crossed out, and in their place, "Caution, slow children at play," had been written in huge stencil letters. She had given herself buck teeth, a bit of a far-off stare, and one of those twirly hats that both children and imbeciles wear. I said, "Thanks." And she said, "But you get it, don't you? It's like your joke." And I said, "What joke?" And she said, "Slow children, for the next time you're out playing in traffic." And I said, "Ha ha! Do you actually want me to display this?" And Mayor Mixon said, No, I'm laughing, but seriously, no, that would be very bad if it was traced back to my office, but you can keep it in your house." I said, "Great, now we'll have something to look at next time you come over." And her face flushed a brighter color than red. She said, "I truly hope so. Unless there's someone in your life who I should be jealous of. Because I am someone who can become very jealous. My heart is not a toy to be played with." Do you hear what I'm saying? And I handed the mayor her mail and said, "Well, they say you shouldn't play in traffic, but I had better go do it. I'll see you soon." And the mayor grabbed my hand with her mail still in it and pressed chainmail to her forehead. "I'm sensing I will see you very soon. Very, very soon. I'm sensing that very soon something is about to happen with someone who's about to become very important to me. And because I am sensing that, I know I will see you very soon." And after a short stint of involuntary paralysis, I said, "Not if I see you first," and held up my big stupid sign of her face to show I was seeing her. I drove home with the mayor's laughter still bouncing around the truck like a loose screw. When I walked inside, I of course did not display her picture, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it out either. I kept imagining all the ways that she might find her way to my home, and the look on her face when she didn't see her face. So I made 2 decisions that day. The first was that I would leave the sign with her face on it in the passenger seat of my car. That way I'd have it handy if we ever faced off. And in the meantime, I could use the carpool lane. The second was that I'd call a sickie the next Saturday, and every Saturday after that, which I could do as a mailman and still be counted among the most superb mailmen of all time. We had a guy once at the post office who we called Reverse Garfield, because he would no-call, no-show for almost the entire week, and then show back up on Monday. I actually ended up asking him to switch to Saturdays, which he agreed to do, however much it compromised a nickname we were all proud of, and for a while, that was that. I didn't see the mayor for 2 weeks. The only problem was that now, every Monday, I had to take over the route of the mail artist formerly known as Reverse Garfield, and the mayor's office was on his route. I didn't even think it'd be a problem. You see, the mayor's office is what's called an office. Every office has a mailroom so that the nice people who work in the nice office don't have to interact with a bunch of deadbeats who work for the post office. As it should be. Because no decent person should have to deal with a person from the U.S. Post. The post office will hire anyone. It's the worst of our populace. Have you ever seen that Jack Nicholson movie, As Good as It Gets? Well, this is as bad as it gets. Half of my coworkers are older than Jack Nicholson in that movie. The other half are juveniles wanted for crimes they committed one state away. Everyone's addicted to heavy barbiturates and no one speaks English. And thank God they do not, because then you'd have to talk to them. Then you'd have to hear about the horror movie which they've turned their lives into. Anytime I read an article about like an acquitted wife beater or like a school teacher who is dating his student, 2 weeks later, they're sitting next to me in the truck. Sometimes both the teacher and the student. Which I kind of don't mind, that's kind of romantic. Interesting story to tell, at the very least, it's less tense than when you get the wives and the wife beaters. Anyway, I say all this to say that the mayor's office has a mailroom. So I'm in the mailroom, handing off the mail to the nice young intern who the mayor has hand her mail. But as I'm trying to hand the mail to this nice-looking young girl, who's probably going to end up being the mayor after her someday, the kid looks at me nasty, like I had two heads. At first, I figured I was just freaking out because I had taken a ton of heavy barbiturates that day. I take a ton of heavy barbiturates. So many that many of my friends call me Barb. But the kid whispers something to her supervisor, and then the supervisor shoots me the same nasty look, and then whispers to me, "You must be the mailman." I joked, "You must be psychic," and again tried to hand the chain mail in my hand to the mail girl. They did not laugh, and they would not take the mail. The supervisor cleared her throat and said, Mayor Mixon has asked to receive all of her mail directly from the mailman from now on. I cleared my throat right back at her. I don't know. I'd hate to take a job from this young lady who may be the mayor herself someday. But the supervisor was already leading me down the hall by hand, saying, "I'm sorry to be differing with you, but Mayor Mixon is the mayor here. Mayor Mixon will always be the mayor here. I should know. I will always be the mayor's male supervisor." And the rest of the office was approximately as strange as that. Everywhere I looked, everyone was looking at me and whispering. Do you ever remember that scene at the end of Rosemary's Baby, where they lead Rosemary to her baby? I felt like I was on my way to see something with scales. Instead, I saw Mayor Mixon, whose admittedly remarkable skin looked tighter than ever. I said, "Hey there, Mayor Mixon." And Mayor Mixon said, "Do you like ghost stories?" I said, "Ghost stories? Not really. I always say life's scary enough." Mayor Mixon said, "That's funny," and did not laugh. "I figured you must like ghost stories, and that's why you decided to ghost me." I said, "Ha ha." "What?" She said, "Ghosting people. My son says that's slang for when someone pretends they're going to become an important part of your life and then disappears without a trace. Seems like kind of a misnomer to me. You see, ghosts don't disappear on you. Ghosts are spirits of obsession who linger with you always, even when you cannot see them. And if that was what you were doing, I would love it." And on this occasion, the mayor's laugh seemed to hurt her. She winced. I put her chainmail to my forehead and said, "Special delivery from the Ghostbusters, ha ha!" And as soon as I joked, she stopped laughing. She stared with her cold eyes, ocean dark, and I felt like I was underwater. We were both pale as ghosts. I said, "Well, I better go play and, and reflexively turned to point at my truck, which was, of course, not visible from inside the mayor's office. I did, however, see the little girl from the mailroom peeking her head in through the cracked door with her supervisor. I couldn't hear what she whispered, but I watched her little lips move, spelling out the words as though they weren't meant for sound at all. The mayor loves the mailman. The mayor, too, whispered something soft and sinister. "You had better not play games with me, slow child." I said, "What did you say?" Not because I didn't hear her, but because I had hoped that if given a second chance, she would say something like, "Oh, nothing. Sorry, I was daydreaming, a list of things I might say if my life was a scary movie." But that's not what happened when I said, "What did you say?" The mayor stared me dead with her icy eyes and said, "You had better slow down, child, and not play games with me." I barely remember the long walk back to the parking lot. I don't remember much of anything of what happened before the incident, but I do recall this strange, lingering feeling that something strange was going to happen. Because when I woke up feeling strange in the hospital, I remember thinking, I knew it! What do they call that, a self-fulfilling prophecy? I remember when I was in the parking lot, I hatched this prophecy. I was so sure something was about to happen that I didn't happen to notice the car that was sneaking up behind me. Neither did I catch a glimpse of the driver who used their Toyota Camry on me like a gun. I was slow to wake up. The doctor said I was unconscious for a week. Once I did wake up, I didn't sleep for 2 weeks because of the pain. Apparently, my heavy love affair with heavy barbiturates had rendered the painkillers they gave me virtually useless. Still, I'm just lucky there was a hospital across the street from the mayor's office, or else I would have bled out in her parking lot. Unluckily, my body cast had me positioned in such a way that I was always looking out the window, which looked out onto my mail truck, stuck in her parking lot. Through my many sleepless nights, I looked through my own passenger window to see the laminated eyes of Mayor Mixon staring back at me from her very stupid sign. I received a letter during my hospital stay. Could have bowled me over with a letter. I have no friends, no life, and no one writes letters, but there I was, a man with mail. I didn't need to put it to my forehead to know who it was from. The mayor's letter contained a hand-drawn picture of a ghost. A little speech bubble showed the ghost saying, "From your boo, ha, my son tells me that's slang for girlfriend. Now that is slang, which makes sense to me." I remember thinking that her handwriting was atrocious and how unlikely it seemed that a woman with bad handwriting would make it to high office. Anyhow, as soon as I could walk, I walked straight to my friend Gary's house. I said, "Hey, man." Gary said, "Hey." I said, "Is your dad home?" He said, "No." "Why?" I said, I know I'm not supposed to come by here when your dad's home." Gary said, "You know you're not supposed to come over at all." I said, "What are you, a baby? Daddy says I'm not supposed to play with you anymore. That's you." And Gary laughed. "So what's up? Are you in trouble again?" I said, "I think so." He said, "Do you need money?" I said, "No. I mean, yes, but we can discuss that later. I think I may be in trouble, Gary, as in grave trouble." "You know Mike Mixon?" Gary said, "Oh, God, what did you do to Mike Mixon?" I said, "Nothing, God. It's just, you remember his mom, don't you?" Gary said, "Of course I remember Mayor Mixon." I said, "Well, she's the one I kind of need help with." Gary said, "Oh, God, what did you do to Mayor Mixon?" I said, "I didn't do anything, okay? Seriously, it's what she's done to me, what she wants to do to me." Gary said, "What does she want to do to you?" I was like, "I don't know, make animal love, I think, but like dark animal love, like how a praying mantis loves its husband so much it cuts its fucking head off." And Gary was like, "So? What's the problem? Mayor Mixon's really pretty." I said, "I guess she is, for her age." And Gary said, "Well, how old are you now?" I said, "Damn, Gary, not that old. Plus, it's different with men and old women, you know? This is more like, do you remember that movie Misery?" And Gary said, "Hell yeah." Sometimes to get Gary to care about something, I had to compare it to a scary movie. I said, "I'm worried that she loves me like that." Gary said, "Well, Mayor Mixon is a lot better looking than Kathy Bates, so that's fine." I said, "Gary, Jimmy Kahn is not miserable because Kathy Bates is ugly. He's in misery because a woman trapped him in a fucking cabin and broke his leg." And Gary said, "Did Mayor Mixon trap you in a cabin and break your leg?" I said, "It's not exactly like the movie Misery, for fuck's sake. But it's close, you know? I wouldn't ask you for your help if this wasn't serious." And Gary said, "I seriously wouldn't mind being trapped in a cabin with Mayor Mixon." I said, "Gary, I think she's going to kill me." Gary said, "What makes you think that?" I said, "I don't know. I think she already tried." Gary said, "She did?" I said, I think she tried to use her Toyota on me like a gun. I didn't see her face or anything like that, but I don't know. I have this voice, you know, like 2 inches behind my ears telling me she's gonna kill you if you don't kill her first." Gary said, "Oh shit. So what are you gonna do?" I said, "I don't know. What does Jimmy Kahn do in Misery?" Gary said, "Well, the old detective comes in right when she's about to kill him and kill herself, but she shoots the old detective in the back like lights out. At least that's what you think, but it's not lights out. He gets off a shot on her. Pop! Hold that. Take 2 of those. Then, downstairs, Jimmy Kahn tricked her into thinking he loves her, just so that he can smash that miserable bitch over the head with a typewriter. It's like the most Stephen King death of all time. There's an evil woman who loves me, the greatest writer of all time, for my mind, and I must kill her with the literal power of my typewriter. I said, you know, this reminds me of the good old days. And Gary said, what do you mean? I said, you know, us two. Sitting around, talking about scary movies. Gary said, yeah. Then later, Jimmy Kahn's eating at a restaurant with Lauren Bacall, and he thinks he sees her, but it's not her. I said, who was it? Gary said, just some bitch. And I said, do you ever think about the good old days? And Gary said, all the time.